because he believes if he quotes the Old Testament to the Hebrews, that will bring credibility to his argument. But his argument he makes in verses 1 through 4. Now let's look at 1 through 4. There's a critical concept here that in some respects we might understand, but this was very hard for the Hebrews to understand. It says, in verse 1, the sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto it. It says, they can never. It says, these sacrifices do not. See the word never in verse 1? They do not make the comers thereunto perfect. That is, Paul is saying, all that slaughter and sacrifice does not do what you think it's been doing. It does not take you from here and bring you up to here. And they're like, what? How can that not be? Well, let's just read a little further. Paul emphasizes this. Verse 2, he asks this short little question. For would they not have ceased to be offered? He says, look, hey, if they did work, if it did work that you slaughter an animal that brings you from here to here, why'd you have to do it again the following year? And the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that? Why do you have to keep on doing it if it worked? Because it doesn't work. Now that's quite a shock to the Hebrews. And it made many of them extremely angry. In verse 3, those sacrifices there is a remembrance made of sins every year. You got to start over and over and over again. And then here's the clincher in verse 4. This is easy to understand. He says, it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. Now, if that's a true statement, it seems like it's making an entire waste of everything in the Old Testament sacrificial law. It seems like it's just, what a waste. You guys have been killing thousands, tens of thousands of animals for no purpose whatsoever. Now, from a Hebrew reading this, that's how he would respond. He would say, so Paul, you're telling us that all the things our grandfathers and great-grandfathers and our ancestors have been doing for 800 years has been of no value whatsoever? And that sounds like what Paul is saying. Sure does. Well, let's move on. Okay, so this is kind of a difficult idea. Let's go to verse 9. We'll skip 5 through 8. Let's start in verse 9. I guess we better read down to verse 14. 9 through 14. If you would, please.
Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And every priest standeth daily ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God, from henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. For by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified.
All right, let's do the easy part of this first. Let's look at verses 12, 13, and 14. This is referring to Jesus, and he's saying, this man, in verse 12, Jesus, after he offered one sacrifice for sin forever, he sat down on the right hand of God. Verse 14, for by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. All right, so Jesus, by his one offering, gave a perfect sacrifice, and that perfect side, just one, close the gap for everybody that's sanctified. Close the gap. All right, we're up here now. Now let's back up a little bit. And let's look at a couple of verses that's a little trickier that we just read over. In fact, verse number Was it there? Let's see. Verse number 10. In fact, it's worded in such a way that our reader even stumbled on it, which you might too. Verse 10, it's written, it seems like it's written awkward, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. By the which will? Well, the problem is that word will is not a verb, it's a noun. It's the same will that is found in verse number 9. Let's read 9 and 10 together and focus on the word will that appears in both. Then said he, and I hope you guys are paying attention because there's some real value here, I believe, I hope, I trust. Then said he, now this is Jesus, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. Thy will, that means thy desire. I come to do thy desire. Now, just for a second, did Jesus ever say something like that? Yes. You might recall, in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he had impulses that said, I'm not sure I really want to go through and die on the cross, he had a prayer, and he closed that prayer by saying, not my will, but what? Thine. So Jesus was sensitive to the will or the desires of God, and he submitted himself to God's desires. He submitted himself to God's desires. Okay. Now we're ready for verse 10. Now we know what the word will means. Okay, you ready? Verse 10? So, okay, now, all right, I'll read again. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, thy desire, O God. He taketh away the first, and he established the second. Let's talk about the first and second testament. First and second covenant. Old covenant, new covenant. Now verse 10. This is for us. By the which will, that's the same will. By the which desire we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. By the which desire we are sanctified. Would you like to be sanctified? Well, I hope you want to be sanctified. Now that verse is telling us how we are sanctified. We are sanctified when, as Jesus submitted his will to God's will became his will. That is how we are sanctified. We are sanctified when God's will becomes our will. And when God's will is not our will, when we are willful, when we have other desires that supersede God's will, and say, oh God, I know that you've got all kinds of commandments, principles, and things by which I'm supposed to order my life, but I don't really want to do it in this area or this area over there. Well, then you are walking in an unsanctified pathway. Your sanctification is when you submit your will to God's will. Your desires to God's desires. And a lot of God's desires aren't hard to figure out. And that's why, though in the end, the law does play a part of our sanctification. Because that's God's will for our life. So when God says, I want you to do thus, we say, okay, I'm going to submit my will to your will. I'm going to do this. And God says, I'd kind of like you to treat your neighbor this way. Oh, all right, I'm going to do my very best to try to treat my neighbor this way. Or whatever it is. That's our sanctification. It's when our will is submitted to God's will. Now, we have an interesting thought that goes into all of this. Boy, time is really slipping by. We have to kind of draw close down, draw this to conclusion. I'm going to try to conclude with two different areas of thoughts. Abraham. How was Abraham saved? How was Abraham saved? tell you how Abraham was saved. Abraham was saved by faith. You say, well, I thought maybe he was saved by all those ritual sacrifices he did. Well, those ritual sacrifices were an act of obedience, which thus falls into submitting his will to God's will, which we'll call sanctification. The Bible is quite plain that Abraham was saved by faith. There's absolutely no question that it was Abraham's faith that saved him. For evidence of that, and this is quoted in several places in the New Testament. In Genesis 15, where we were before, we didn't read this verse, but I'll read it for you now. Genesis chapter 15, Abraham, in verse 6 it says, he, Abraham, believed in the Lord, and he, God, counted to him for righteousness. Abraham was saved by faith. Now, returning to Hebrews 10, and we try to sort all this out. We say, okay, so we don't do any more ritual sacrifices with bloody animals, but we do thus apply the blood of Christ, as Paul describes, to our life. Now, I guess I'm going to have to. We'll start in verse 15. And we'll read a little bit, and then we'll try to draw this to conclusion soon. Eric, would you go to Hebrews 10 and read from 15? Let's go down to verse number 20.
Whereof the Holy Ghost also is a witness to us. For after that he had said before, this is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds will I write them. And their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. Now, where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he hath consecrated for us, through the veil, that is to say, his flesh.
Verses 17 and 18 summarize it very well. Their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. That's good. Our sins are forgiven. Now, where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. What does that mean? Well, it means forgiveness. Where forgiveness of the sins has been made complete in Christ, there's no more offering for sin. It means there's no more need to make any attempt at an offering. Remember, the blood of the bulls and goats didn't do that anyway. They didn't wash away sin. They didn't provide for remission of sin. But it says Jesus Christ does provide the remission of sin, and his sacrifices once and for all perfects this sin problem and closes this gap. He has a perfect sacrifice. He perfects the law of blood sacrifice is what he does. He makes it a perfect blood sacrifice. And where the law of blood sacrifice is now made perfect, there's no more need for the blood of bulls and goats. Now, all that sounds real good. But before we relax too much, let's read a little further this chapter in closing. All right, let's... I'd like to read, let's start in verse 24 and read to 31. Because these verses now, please hang with me just a little longer. I know it's been a long service this morning. These verses are verses that have a strong cautionary note for all of us. They're not quite as happy as what we've already read. And they're going to show that God is a God of holiness and a God of mercy. He's also a God of justice. And this is all something that we can't be too casual about our spiritual life. Okay, go ahead.
And let us consider one another to provoke them to love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more, as we see the day approaching. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful look for judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sore punishment, suppose ye, shall he be, though thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot of the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant, wherewith he was sanctified, an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. For ye know him that hath said, Vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Paul is telling us not to be too casual in our approach to this problem of sin and how it's going to be addressed in our life. Notice what it says in verse 26.